Now I hear it. Can you guys all hear me down there?
Yep.
Can you hear me right here?
Yep.
Hi, Britt. So Mig-15, this airplane was built in 1952. It was made in Russia, most likely. It's got Russian tags on it. The whole first batch of Mig-15s were made in Russia and then went to China. And this has been through probably 3 or 4 or 5 overhauls. I don't know. It was in service from the 50s all the way until about 1985 or early 80s anyway. So it's been probably overhauled by the Chinese. So a lot of Chinese writing in there, mostly Chinese writing, and some Russian little data plates and stuff. So the ones that are made in China, starting in the mid-50s, were called F5s? F4s, I forget. But then they made their own MiG-15s and MiG-17s afterwards, and I forget the designation. I apologize. But anyway, the airplane is about 1,000 pounds lighter than the F-86, has about 1,000 pounds less thrust, but does climb better. It will fly higher. Now you gotta put what Sabre you're talking about into perspective. This is a little faster than the F-86A. The F-86E was about the same speed. And the F-86F, after a while, is a bit faster. So if these two airplanes are taking off from a dead stop right next to each other, and you say go, and we're doing a formation takeoff, this will jump out in front of the F-86.
Took off.
So I have to throttle back and I'm doing a formation takeoff with Steve. So we're going down the runway, so I have to kind of hold it on the runway. The Sabre will rotate a little bit later. We'll get going, and then the Mig will out-accelerate the Sabre if you pull the throttle back.
Yeah.
I don't know, probably
Sorry, I yelled, let's
250
go.
knots.
Because I was excited.
The Sabre would start catching up. And maybe by the time you're 300 knots, the Sabre would catch you. And then after that, the Sabre's faster. So at higher end, the Sabre would be faster. Now that's if you stayed level. The MiG's going to outclimb this thing, the Sabre jet, even the F, all the way up. The MiG will go up to 50, 55,000. Sabre will go up to 40, 45,000, somewhere in there. I forgot the exact numbers. You can look it up on Wikipedia, which may or may not be right. But the MiG doesn't fly nearly as nice, so the MiGs are kind of squirrely, strange up there. I've never been to 45,000 feet in the MiG. Been to 40,000 feet in the Sabre. It flies very nice. So controllability is a little less with this airplane than it is in the F-86 up high. Down low, they're pretty equal. I flew F-16s in the Air Force for 12 years. I flew against F-18s, and as far as, I've never flown an F-18, but flying against them is pretty equal. And you heard Chuck Yeager say it comes down to the pilot. He said that with this as well, it comes down to the pilot. In a one-on-one dogfight, there is no clear advantage between the Sabre jet and this. Each does a couple of little things better. The Sabre's a little more comfortable to fly. The visibility out of this is still pretty good. Even though they said it was a little less in the talk, it's really not bad in this airplane. You get all around visibility. You sit a little bit lower. The Sabre has, they're comparable. The visibility is not a big factor in this. Better guns, it's got 23 millimeter cannons that are very, very good. It's got a 37 millimeter cannon, which is meant to shoot down bombers. But if it did ever hit a fighter, that would finish it. But a little bit better gun setup, and they did a test in Korea called, I'm drawing a blank, but they did a 20 millimeter gun test with 12 Sabres in 1953, and they were incredibly much better. Gun valve, thank you, Project Gun Valve, thank you. Was done by a guy named Colonel Harrison Thing, yes, Harry Thing, but he was quite famous. He's a World War II ace. I don't know if anyone called him Harry, but anyhow, that's when the Air Force finally made the transition to 20 millimeter. Was in that, and all the future airplanes. The Navy had, of course, already gone to 20 millimeter. A little more effective air-to-air round than the 50 caliber. So let's see. They're both pretty comparable. Like I said, the Sabre has a little bit more range, not much. The MiGs were flying over their bases. So the Sabres had to go get them. So the Sabres were at an endurance and range disadvantage for most of the war. Even sitting here with 2 tanks, I can go to Reno with 2 tanks. Without the tanks, I can go to Vegas comfortably. That's about it. Go a little further. Phoenix, maybe. But it's pretty short range without the tanks on it. Those 2 tanks reach 100 gallons. The airplane's got about 370 gallons internal. The Sabre's 435-ish. All right, I have to add it up in my head. I'm just remembering it. But the Sabre's got a little more gas. Weird thing about this too is the main fuel tank is the big fuel tank, so it gets about half empty. When you pull in G's, you stop the fuel sloshes. So it pitches the airplane pretty good. For those of you that have an old car and you hear the fuel sloshing in your fuel tank, this does it in the airplane, but it goes back and forth and actually changes the pitch a little bit, and it would spoil a gunshot. So there's some old, this is 1944, 45 technology, so. This never had the flying tail, it's just got a conventional elevator. So you heard about P-38s and compressibility, and all that is the supersonic shockwave blanking out elevators and controls, and the boundary layer starts separating. This suffered from that. The A model Sabre suffered from that. And you heard about the all-flying tail in the F-86E, where in the F-86 the whole tail moved. Now in the F-86s they kept it looking like there's an elevator because it was top secret. So what happens in the F-86, say if my wrist is the elevator and the rest is the whole horizontal, the Sabre would move like this. But in the E and the F, you're moving the whole thing. Like in an F-15 or an F-16, you're moving the whole horizontal stabilizer. That is an extremely good tactical advantage, performance advantage in combat, especially higher Mach numbers. So this does not have that little tiny elevator. And then there's some problems with the wings. The Mig-17 basically fixed the shortcomings of this airplane and added an afterburner, but the Mig-17 wing is different, the ailerons are different. Compared to the Sabre, the big issue of this is roll rate. It's about half the roll rate of the Sabre. So the roll rate's pretty bad. It's very heavy, doesn't roll very good. Other than that, it's an excellent airplane. Fun to fly, it's bulletproof. They'll be sitting for a month. You'll have to drag the Sabre out and do 3, 4, 5, 6 hours a night. If you service this thing and both tires are ready to go usually. So the day-to-day maintenance on this is much easier. They were able to, the whole gun package, it's in a cart. You can just unsnap the panels, and then there's some lugs. You undo those lugs, bring the whole thing down, goes, and there's a little roll-around cart. You set it on, take that one out, bring a new one in, just put it up. You can change all the armament in this in 15 minutes. And there's that gun packages, they changed the whole thing. So that's probably not the one that came with the airplane, because and a good crew, if you had 2 or 3 guys do what they're doing, I bet you could do it in less than 10 minutes. Change the entire armament, because they had it all ready to go. Another one ready to go, just stick it in. So the way the gear is shaped, like American airplanes have a straight landing gear with an oleo strut. These are bent, and the oleo strut's in between, so they're made for rough fields. So there's some pretty thoughtful design and where they would operate these things in mud and dirt fields and austere conditions and ease of maintenance. So those are some of the pluses of the airplane. The wing fences, the way I tell a Mig-15 and a Mig-17, I'll get to you in a minute, I promise. As a matter of fact, can you tell me what's the difference between a Mig-15 and a Mig-17? He's good. But also, the way you can tell is the Mig-17 will have 3 of those fences on the wings. Mig-15 has 2. So if you ever see a picture, that's how you tell. And the afterburner, he's very smart. They changed the wings and the ailerons, and it's a much nicer flying airplane. I've never flown one, but they do fly a lot nicer than the Mig-15. So that's the improvement. And that'll outdo a Sabre by the Mig-17. Once you light the afterburner, I've flown with the Mig-17, and he just lights the afterburner and goes, bye-bye. So see you. So let's see, that's kind of a brief overview on the airplane. I guess I will entertain some questions. I told the young man over here I would answer his question. This, by a large margin. The 262 is a generation before this. Actually, I think the F-80 would do better. The 262 swept wings were only about 18 degrees, which is not enough to get the swept wing performance. The only reason they did it on the 262 was for the engine CG. This is swept at 35 degrees, so it gets full, and so is the Sabre jet. They're swept back at 35 degrees. So yeah, I think this would, and it's got a better power to weight, better engine, better all on.
Ooh, T6.
These guns are pretty good. These guns are pretty good. And you know what? If you can't hit them with 2, you're not going to hit them with 4. So.
That's XJC. Is that live?
Ours is a live seat, yeah. It's a 1980s cartridge, and it's all. They had a shotgun shell. It looks like a big 37mm cannon shell, and it's supposed to adjust for your weight. I don't know how. There's kind of a spring thing, and I guess how it vents and all that. So it's not just a bang, but yeah, it does. Between the 15 and 17, I don't know. I suspect the 17 is at least twice as good as this. This one's really bad. I never asked the question of the 17 guys. I should have asked Bill recently. There's a question over here. Yeah. Yeah, it did. Well, early F-86s had a K-14 gun sight, just like a Mustang. And then they came out with, I think it was called the A1 gun sight, and there was it would lock on and compute the range. So it was, and that was an advantage, yes. So this just maintained basically a World War II gyroscopic gun sight like a K-14. Yeah, I mean, all the early jets do that are powered. Well, I mean, it's not a problem if you know what you're doing. It's not a real. I mean, it's if you do what you're supposed to and do it how you're trained, it's not an issue. They're all underpowered swept-wing jets will do it. Not like an F-16 where you just pop the motor out of it. But yeah, you gotta watch it. But when your experience is not as big a deal as it needs to be. The question, is there a height or size requirement? No. Some pretty tall guys flew it, but most the Chinese were smaller, but Steve flies at 6 foot. It's a normal cockpit. I mean, Robin Olds is 6'4", he flew in a P-38. That P-38 has a smaller sitting height cockpit legroom than this. So let me get down here some.
Oh, me?
No, you already fly it. It's a Russian. Are the gauges still in Russian?
No, it's been restored with American gauges.
One other question. I know that one of the big advantages is that it climbs really well, but I heard that when it dives, it starts to lose control. Have you ever experienced
The question is,
that?
it climbs really well, but dives, it can lose control. It suffers from compressibility, just like the World War II airplanes did, just like the Sabre does. The Sabre is, at higher speed, is much more stable airplane, yes. This, you got to start watching it, and you don't ever want to stall this at low altitude. You basically jump out of it. If you stall it, it can be and I've never stalled it, so I don't know, and I'm not ever gonna. So it has some pretty violent stall characteristics from what I understand. Right behind it, yeah.
How did this plane end up at this museum?
The question was, how did this airplane end up at this museum? Briefly, it was imported in 1985 from China. A team went over and got 4 or 5 airplanes out of China. This airplane went to the owner before us, who was a great supporter of our museum, Tom Friedkin, who's a Comanche fighters. He has passed, his son Dan Friedkin, but Tom donated the MiG and the F-86 to us, 15, 20 years ago now. So this was a donation from the Friedkin family. Any questions way down here? Anything?